Rockford Park District was founded in 1909, but our roots are deep in the history of the greater Rockford area. For the next few minutes, we hope to share some of that history with you, a history filled with challenge, change, and a few surprises. In the beginning, there was the Rock River. The Indians called it Sinisippi, which meant clear flowing. For thousands of years, they hunted and fished its shores. When the Indians were driven from this river in 1832, Chief Blackhawk said in defeat, "I leave the river and the forest to you. Take care of them." In 1834, new settlers arrived at the rocky ford in the river, including Germanicus Kent, Thatcher Blake, and Lewis Lemon, a slave who earned his freedom helping to found the village of Rockford, which was at first named Midway. In 1852, the railroad arrived, and with the railroad came immigrants to work in Rockford's factories and shops. By 1855, the population was 8,000. The railroads opened markets for Rockford products across the nation. The river town soon boasted reaper factories, machine shops, a brewery, 10 churches, and 5 newspapers. Rockford was moving up in the world, and ever mindful of its image, an ordinance was passed outlawing pigs and cows from roaming the streets. During the Civil War, these troops were among the 4 regiments that trained along the Rock River at Camp Fuller, in the area now known as Churchill's Grove. It was during this time that Tinker Swiss Cottage, which is now a Park District museum, was built on the bluffs above Kent Creek by Robert Tinker. Rockford was a boom town. The Civil War was over, and the gay 90s were ahead. Everyone believed in progress, including Tinker, who had his wife's stately mansion demolished to make way for the city's 3rd railroad. By 1889, the city would look like this. 5 years later, Second Congregational Church burned for the first time. Sadly, it would burn again 85 years later. While Rockford daredevils launched this early hot air balloon, most folks settled for transportation they knew, including horses, bicycles, and good old-fashioned ingenuity. By the turn of the century, the Rockford area had grown to over 31,000, and the city now boasted an opera house and vaudeville houses that attracted top performers. We even had our own circus with a dancing bear. What we didn't have at the turn of the century was a park system. Factories, over 170 of them, dominated the once beautiful river. Picnics and outdoor gatherings, when they occurred, often took place at the fairgrounds, where animals were also exhibited and illegal boxing matches were held. And while the wealthy lived in elegant homes, many families were in tenement housing with no backyards like these along Court Street or 7th Street. The crime rate was high, and as late as 1904, we were still hanging men at the courthouse on West State, while thousands watched. Trolley and interurban tracks crisscrossed Rockford, taking workers from their houses to the factories. There was, however, Harlem Park, an amusement park run by the trolley company to increase profits. The popular 47-acre riverfront park off Harlem Boulevard, north of the current Auburn Street Bridge, featured a giant circle swing and a roller coaster that climbed 1,100 feet and then plunged down in 26 seconds. The auditorium seated 5,000 and was often booked for weeks at a time with popular speakers and musical conductors like John Philip Sousa. Out-of-town visitors could camp along the river in tents. But eventually, private investors would shut down Harlem Park and subdivide the property into lots for riverfront homes. Meanwhile, civic-minded business leaders like Levin Faust and members of the Rockford Club, seeing the dangers of unguided development and profiteering, began campaigning for a permanent park system for all people, young and old, rich and poor. These men, many with families of their own, knew that a healthy city needed both factories and forests, especially for the thousands of children without backyards who otherwise played in the streets or on dangerous railroad tracks. The campaign for a park system supported by taxes required hard work, but in 1909, Rockford area citizens, by a narrow margin, voted yes for a park district. Its boundaries were established, extending north to include what would become Loves Park, west to Meridian Road, east to Boone County, and south to Morristown. The first elected Board of Commissioners went to work fast. 77 acres of riverfront property was available on North 2nd Street at $600 an acre, but private real estate speculators were already circling overhead. The commissioners put their money where their mouths were and personally secured a $47,000 loan so the park district could buy the land for our first park, which they named Sinisippi. One Rockford newspaper claimed the park was too far out in the country and would never be used. And Levin Faust did shoo away cows before opening the park to the public. But Sinisippi was an immediate success. Soon families were traveling by horseback, buggy, and trolley for picnics. 40 adjoining acres of pasture land were purchased, and a popular 9-hole golf course was built. Soon bands were playing the first concerts in the park. A mile-long brick road was laid, and cars like this one at Sinisippi Park in 1910 presented a new challenge for the young park system. A hitching post had been built at Sinisippi for 40 horse-drawn buggies, but it was cars that increasingly brought people to the parks. This motorcycle policeman was hired by the Park District half-time in 1910, and a full-time squad car later in 1914, as the fans of speed kept trying to get faster. Our commitment to keeping the park safe eventually led to establishing a highly trained ranger staff. Meanwhile, cars, like other forms of transportation, had their particular problems. While car salesmen staged wild stunts to promote new cars, the Park District was busy in 1914 promoting a bold long-range plan that envisioned an entire riverfront of parks. The 91-acre purchase of Blackhawk Park in 1911 was in keeping with this commitment to buy riverfront property. Always a popular spot for picnics and camping, which cost 50 cents a night, Blackhawk Park also became home to Rockford's first zoo in 1917, featuring a monkey, a lion, and an elephant named Babe. You didn't have to be Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn to enjoy the river. Canoeing and rowing were popular. Clamming boats and dredges plied the river, turning shells into millions of buttons. And rare freshwater pearls from the Rock River sold for hundreds of dollars in New York City. The river also connected us with Loves Park to the north. The most impressive boat on the river was the steamship Illinois. It sank in 1908, was restored, and took thousands under the high bridge on excursions upriver where passengers could play baseball and picnic on shore across from what is now the Sports Corps complex. On evening excursions, bands played on the top decks and couples danced in the moonlight. In 1924, the boat burned while moored during the winter. Winter carnivals on the river, attended by thousands, were sponsored by the Park District. In those days, the ice often froze 24 inches deep. In 1912, as crowds watched from the bridges, the river broke into terrifying chunks of ice. Ironically, a month later, ice would sink the Titanic thousands of miles away. With spring thaws came flooding, and along with the rest of the city, the parks found themselves underwater. By the time Teddy Roosevelt came to town in 1912, the city had transferred management of 13 parks to the Park District, including Haight and Haskell Parks, and the site of the county fairgrounds, which became Fairgrounds Park. Park District employees went to work immediately developing Fairgrounds Park into an ideal playground, featuring 7 tennis courts, 3 baseball diamonds, volleyball courts, and even a cinder track for running and bicycle races. Since the river was not safe for swimming, the Park District built wading pools. But in this picture from summer of 1916, the Horseman Street Quarry looks like the coolest spot in town. But even with lifeguards, the quarry proved dangerous and was closed. So the Park District began building the first of 4 swimming pools, starting at Fairgrounds Park, and soon thousands of children a week had a safe place to swim. Fairgrounds Park became a gathering place for the community. Schools were cramped for space, so teachers turned to the parks, beginning a long partnership between the school system and the Park District. Outstanding students were honored at ceremonies like this, and in 1915, 15,000 came to Fairgrounds Park to watch an historical play about the founding of Rockford. The dream of Levin Faust seemed to be coming true. Whether children, workers, or businessmen, the parks became our backyard. But the days of innocence were ending as World War I broke out in Europe. Rockford entered the war in 1917, and the Park District helped provide recreation to some of the 250,000 soldiers at Camp Grant who used our parks. In 1919, when the soldiers returned from Europe, they paraded through the streets of Rockford, crossed its bridges to Black Hawk Park for a celebration attended by tens of thousands. But some of the soldiers didn't come back, including Lieutenant Clayton Ingersoll, killed in France. In his memory, his parents donated the land for a 150-acre park, including an 18-hole, state-of-the-art golf course. Golf had become a popular sport for all ages, and soon other courses were being planned. By 1921, when the community gathered around this holiday tree at Fairgrounds Park, we had much to be thankful for. Beatty Park and its historic Indian mounds had been donated by the Beatty sisters, along with Beatty Playground on the east side. During the summer, average attendance at the Park District's 5 playgrounds was over 8,000 each week. Baseball, a favorite sport in the parks from the beginning, was more popular than ever. Back in 1865, led by its famous ace pitcher Albert Spalding, Rockford's Forest City team was a member of the first National Baseball League. And in one extraordinary game in 1867, the Rockford team scored 110 runs and held the opponents to 10. But during World War II, baseball took a new meaning in Rockford with the organizing of the Rockford Peaches, a professional fast-pitch women's team that won 4 national championships and often played to sold-out crowds of over 4,000 fans at Byers Stadium. Along with baseball, flying captured the attention of Americans, and Rockford had its own share of aviation heroes, including Bessica Raich, the first woman to make an accredited solo airplane flight. And in 1928, a year after Lindbergh's heroic flight to France, Rockford's own Fish Hassel, along with his mechanic Shorty, tried flying north to Sweden over the Arctic Circle from Machesney Airport, but landed instead on an iceberg in Greenland, where after a dramatic rescue, Hassel became a folk hero of sorts. While Hassel pondered how to unbury his plane, which is now in our museum center, Rockford in 1928 was unbearing from its worst tornado of the century and heading towards the Great Depression. During the Depression, our parks were used by more families than at any other time in our history. We survived the Depression in part because of government work projects, including a new recreational lake at Levings Park, which was by now part of the park system. During this time, the Park District also moved into the building now occupied by the Burpee Museum of Natural History, which was Park District headquarters until 1971. History marched on. The Depression, like the next great war, came and went. But the parks remained for all permanent blessings. The Second World War was barely over when the Park District joined in another battle, this time against polio, which in August 1945 closed the parks as children were quarantined and warned from engaging in all fatiguing activities. Soon, the 334-acre Camp Grant Rifle Range along the Kishwaukee River was donated by Seth B. Atwood to the Park District and became one of our most popular parks. Atwood, who served 32 years as a Park District Commissioner, symbolized the dedication of staff and unpaid elected commissioners. In 1956, supported by the Boys Club and other organizations, a recreation levy was passed, and the Park District now provided year-round supervised recreation. By the summer of 1958, the recreation programs attracted over 20,000. As the greater Rockford area and the machines produced here grew larger, so did the role of the Park District. During the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Park District experienced its greatest growth ever in programs and facilities. Working in partnership with over 500 organizations, our parks offered activities for citizens of all ages, including nationally recognized programs like Camp Sunshine. When the Rockford area faced the nation's highest unemployment in 1982, the Park District joined with other organizations to help link our diverse community in new ways, and has continued to help bridge the rivers that separate, offering all citizens a chance to learn and grow on supervised playgrounds, in camps, at our museums, and most importantly, in nature. The greater Rockford area has changed in many ways since the founding of the park system in 1909. Now, on the eve of a second 100 years, a brief accounting of the past 25 years sees the result of a special emphasis given to growth and to the new. Over 4,600 acres of parks are now joined by the Norris Aldine Golf Club, the ever-expanding Magic Waters, a growing museum presence featuring Tinker Swiss Cottage, Midway Village, and the Riverfront Museum Complex showcasing the Discovery Center, the Rockford Art Museum, and the Burpee Museum of Natural History. Sports Corps 1 and 2, award-winning soccer and softball complexes with an indoor soccer center as well. Davis Park, a festival center in downtown Rockford. The Carlson Ice Arena with the Sapporo Playworld Indoor Play Center. Miles of new recreation pathways and 173 green parks and playgrounds along the river and in every neighborhood, the common backyards for all of us, all in realization of the dreams of our founders, thousands of contributing individuals, and partner organizations. But the work is far from over, and as we plan for the future, we continue to look to the past for inspiration. The trees, planted so long ago, grow taller every year, roots deep in this common ground we share. So, welcome to your parks and playgrounds. This journey back and on to the present, we hope gives you a better understanding of who we are and who we will become.